Hey, this is E-Rock at Fanboy Films, and welcome to Debrief. Today we're talking about the women of 1:30 a.m. I had been working on a previous project when I came across the clip of Lily Singh announcing her new show on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And I wasn't really watching the new shows and late night at that time. By now I've gotten involved in sort of researching the older shows from the 70s through the 90s, and I'm not really keeping up with the new stuff, so I kind of just noted her announcement for a later time. I thought, someday I'm going to want to know when this happened, so save some of the clips and kind of note all of it, but not really do anything with it at the time. But, I thought that the landscape of late night TV...
I'm a Latino. I know something about landscape.
...could certainly use some diversity. Lots of white guys on there. Couldn't hurt to have women. Couldn't hurt to have non-whites. So I remember tuning in and checking out the pilot. I shouldn't say tuned in. I should say saw it on YouTube. I found it sort of curious that she opens with this skit about how nobody expected the non-white, non-male, non-hetero talk show host, and I thought, well, I think they actually sought her out probably because she did represent all that, so it did get me thinking about all the prior women in late night, so that kind of planted the seed again. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered from my college days, I used to be at the computer at night doing homework or whatever, and the TV was on in the background, and I remember later with Greg Kinnear, and I remember all the guest hosts, and somewhere in the back of my mind I remember that a woman had come in and taken over as permanent host towards the end of that. I didn't actually remember her name at the time, so I looked her up, Cynthia Garrett, and it seemed at the time that there was very little to find on YouTube about Cynthia Garrett hosting later, and I couldn't find many articles on Google or on even on newspapers.com at the time. Maybe I didn't search hard enough, but I didn't find much. So I had a thought that at some point I would do a making of the Late Night Saga episode, kind of like James Rolfe had once done a making of the Angry Video Game Nerd. And what I took away from that was that he was able to find a game that really didn't have enough to say about it to justify an entire review of one game, but it would work for a making of where most of the episode would be about how he made it, and then the actual review part of it would be very small right at the end. And I thought that, like Cynthia Garrett in a spotlight probably would be something like that. It would only be 3 to 5 minutes worth of material because that's all I'd be able to find. So I started thinking making of Late Night Saga featuring Cynthia Garrett. Somewhere along the way, I saw an article or something about Helen Reddy talking about how she had been a permanent host on the Midnight Special, a show that I didn't even know had permanent hosts. I thought it had a rotating guest host just like Saturday Night Live. So I was sort of surprised to find that, and I was able to find a few clips, once again, not very many. So between Helen Reddy and Cynthia Garrett, and then of course Rona Barrett, who I'd already touched upon twice in Three's a Crowd and in the Melee with Snyder, I started thinking, well, what if each woman, because even Rona Barrett, when I profiled her before, I couldn't find very much of her on The Tomorrow Show. I could find clips of her on other shows and articles about other stuff, the 30 years she was a gossip columnist, but I couldn't find much about the 9 months she was on The Tomorrow Show. So it was another like, oh, there's not much to say about this one person. So that's when I started thinking, what if I collected all of the women of late night that had hosted here and there for a few months, just to kind of shine a spotlight on these obscure figures? I thought it might be kind of cool. And I still had a thought of calling it Cynthia Garrett and the Women of 1:30. But I thought that I'd better find out who all the other women were, so I started actively seeking anyone in that time period from, when Midnight Special started in '73 until Cynthia Garrett hosted in 2000. And of course, I went right back to my work on what I call the Tom Snyder Project, which is my attempt to list all the episodes, come out with a complete episode guide, and gather all the episodes themselves. Along the way in that project, I had found out that Kelly Lang had guest hosted for Tom quite a number of times, whole weeks at a time. So I thought that she was worthy of inclusion as a host in the time period. And also somewhere along the way I had found out that Nancy Friday had hosted some kind of a segment. I still don't know exactly what her role was on The Tomorrow Show, but from what I've seen in some of the later episodes, it seems like she was on quite a lot, maybe even every night, at least for some stretch of time. I don't know how long that stretch was, but... And then the other host that I remembered from my own college experience was Rita Sever on Friday night. I remember her and Henry Cho both. And Henry Cho I had seen doing stand-up comedy before that, so I thought, it would be interesting to see what Rita had been up to since then. And I was only really aware of Linda Ellery because I had seen a clip of Tom Snyder on the Bob Costas later.
Now, it was almost 21 years ago that you opened up this time slot. I don't think, of course, there were others who followed. Linda Ellerby had the overnight program,
Right.
and then we came along after a few years of a gap.
And that's the first I heard of Linda Ellerby and NBC News Overnight. Not to discount Lloyd Dobbins and the other guy who came later, I can't remember his name. But I was trying to focus on the women of late night, so I focused on Linda Ellerby and not the other two. Maybe I should revisit NBC News Overnight someday in more depth. So I had all these hosts, and I was starting to think about this format of just calling it the Women of 130. That was around when I found out that Cynthia Garrett had the ministry, and when I started looking at that stuff, I found out that there was a lot of information, a lot of video on YouTube of the sessions. I started finding more information on newspapers.com and on Google and about her time on Later and her time on VH1. And I started to realize that I probably could have done an entire spotlight on Cynthia Garrett, kind of like I did on Pat Sajak. But by that time, the whole idea of doing this Women of 130 thing seemed pretty appealing. It seemed a little different than the other spotlights I'd done. I'm always trying to do not only spotlighting a different host, but trying to do it in a different way if I can. So I kind of stuck with this format that I'd come up with and started piecing everything together. I hadn't really considered adding Lily Singh to the mix because her show had, given me the idea to look into everyone who had hosted before her, all the women that came before her. So I didn't want to exclude her because I don't like her show, but it's just because she had a show that was on and she had lots of people who knew who she was from YouTube, so she didn't need the attention. This was about the people that came before her. Although then I realized she is one of the Women of 130, she should also be included. So she kind of bookends my episode, and it also delighted me so much because now that I had 8 hosts, I could do the Brady Bunch layout with the boxes. I don't know if anybody knows what the Brady Bunch is anymore, but the visual got in my head, and that became my thumbnail and the opening of the show. And it was really late in the proceedings that I found out about Amber Ruffin, who I'd never heard of, and that she had a show. And so she got the Alice spot in the box lineup. So it was just a perfect way to cap it off. I didn't plan that. It just was something that, it was just a happy accident that just sort of fell into place. This is probably the most time I've spent in post-production on one of these, at least since Three's a Crowd. And that was an edit that took me 9 months, and this one I did in 5 weeks, so I'm kind of happy with that. When I say post-production, I mean the most time after I've, done my format, figured out what I'm trying to do, gathered all the clips, put the script together, laid it all out on the timeline. The most time, replacing my temp audio with the studio track. The most time reducing audio hiss from all the clips. Trying to do color correction, clean up all the video as much as I could, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, trimming it down. Once it's all done and you can see it all played back smoothly, then you can start to look at it as far as content and say, it's too long, it needs to be shortened up in parts, it needs stuff added in other parts. For example, the clip of the Carol Burnett show that I stuck in there for Rona Barrett, I didn't have in there originally, but I just felt like I had listened to my own voice narrating too much and I needed a break. I needed something to break up the chapters in most cases, and some of them already had their own natural chapter breaks. And of course, when I get to Linda Ellerby, I found clips of her saying almost the exact same things I was saying in my script that I had already written. So I could remove my voice and put her voice in. I always like to hear from the subjects themselves rather than just hear my version of it. So anytime I can replace my narration with an actual clip, I'm going to do it. But as a result, the show is kind of unbalanced. When I say show, my video, it's sort of unbalanced because I'm narrating the beginning and the end, and then right in the middle there's a big 8-minute chunk of Linda Ellerby just talking about herself, which is awesome. One thing that was a little unbalanced, which I didn't really intend, I did mention that Nancy Friday had passed away prior to making my video, and I had also mentioned that Helen Reddy had passed away in my original video. But as I was going through, one of the very last things I found was the I Am Woman trailer for the movie, and I stuck that at the end. And then it ended on such an up note that I didn't really want to say, and then she died. So it seemed like there was no good place to put the mention of her passing, so I cut it out. But I didn't cut out the Nancy Friday one, I think because it was kind of the natural ending to her segment for me. And so it's kind of weird that I mentioned one and not the other. And I thought, in hindsight, right after I uploaded the video, I thought, I should have put just a title card at the end mentioning Helen Reddy's passing, but I didn't go back and redo the video for that. So she does get kind of that nice send-off at the end with the Letterman clip. And another creative decision I made about the structure of this was, originally when I went through, I was going to have each subject, I was going to talk about each subject, each host, their, how they came to be a host, and then their time in late night, and then what they did afterwards. I was going to do all the follow-up. Everything was going to be like self-contained. Each of the 7 hosts was going to have a self-contained bit, and then that would be the end. But then I decided that I didn't like the momentum of that. I preferred to just show each host in the late night time slot, and then to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and kind of just have this long uninterrupted, look at the late night on NBC as it happened, and then save all the Where Are They Now stuff for the end. That felt like it had a better flow for the majority of the video. When I got to the Where Are They Nows, originally I was going to put them in the same order. I was going to start over at Helen Reddy and go all the way through in chronological order to Cynthia Garrett. But I, for some reason, felt that would be very repetitious, and I decided it would be less repetitious, I guess, at least in my mind, to do them in reverse order. And when I got to the Where Are They Nows, go right to Cynthia Garrett, which just kind of came right at the end of her spotlight. I would go right to the follow-up, and then backwards through all the rest, all the way back to Helen Reddy, and then that would bring the whole video full circle. We would end the same place we began. And again, I didn't know that I was going to end with the trailer for her biopic, which had the same song that I used at the beginning of the video. So it really brought it full circle. And then for the Letterman clip that I used afterwards, to be using the exact same song again, it seemed very appropriate to me, but I mean, maybe it's too much of a good thing. But again, some of those creative choices some of them are planned and some aren't. Some of they just kind of, it becomes a happy accident. Maybe I should say there's many ways you could do it, and you just kind of find which way seems better. That's all I really had to say about that video. I hope you enjoyed it, and more to come in the future. See you next time.